You're listening to a Rock Candy podcast.
You are now entering Magnified Studios. Welcome.
Coming to you from Magnified Studios, Magnified Pod presents It's Hard to Find a Podcast, covering your favorite indie bands from the 90s Christian alternative scene. Put your tape decks on record. I'm Andrew.
I'm John.
And this is our podcast. And we are wrapping up Pedro the Lion with this episode, with a very special episode. Interview with Brandon Vedder, who did the 2019 documentary Strange Negotiations.
Hey.
And we have an awesome conversation.
Yes.
And
Rad dude.
We talked about after we ended, we're like, John, you were saying, oh man, I just could have kept talking to that dude.
Yeah, man.
And isn't that always the way? We have such cool people on, and we're like,
it's true.
Are we
friends now?
Best
or
friends now?
we just become best friends?
Yep. And we're gonna have a studio with so much room for activities.
Yes, we need that.
So, but we have a great conversation ahead. So I think we should get to that, because after the conversation with Brandon, we need to throw down on our Pedro album rankings and our set lists, which is going to require some conversation. So
yes,
why don't we get to this interview with Brandon Vedder? Well, today, John, on Magnified Pod, we welcome Brandon Vedder. He's an award-winning filmmaker known for his music videos, documentaries, narrative films. In 2019, his documentary about David Bazan, Strange Negotiations, premiered at South by Southwest to critical acclaim, which we will talk about today. Brandon, welcome to Magnified Pod.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we have been, as you know, going through the discography of Pedro the Lion primarily, and since for the start of this fourth season, and we had a lot of people who felt like it would be inappropriate for us to not cover Curse Your Branches, so we tacked that on last week.
I saw that.
So, and this interview with you feels like this is sort of the culmination of this section of the pod and talking about Pedro, and it feels like an appropriate cap to this part of the season. Kind of getting to talk about where your experience with the film and making the film, and with David, and kind of this new era of Pedro that kind of started where the film ended. So I feel like it's and we just had covered the two most recent albums, so it feels like an appropriate time to have this conversation. So we appreciate you taking the time with us.
No, for sure. I think it's going to be fun to nerd out about it.
Absolutely. I hope we get to touch on stuff you haven't talked about in other interviews, because we're going to go granular.
Yeah.
But this isn't one of those questions. This is one you've answered a bunch. But how did the movie come to be? Like, you're a filmmaker, you were a fan of Dave's music, but how did you decide that his story would be a good one for a feature-length documentary? Did you cold approach him? How did that process work?
Yeah, I was just finishing up today listening to the first episode you guys did, and Andrew, you say a bunch on there. I wish that I would have had this voice in my head, or I wish I would have had this record to kind of walk alongside during this kind of formative period in my life. And yeah, like I heard, so kind of put a pin in that idea, but I heard a podcast with Dave. I was finishing a film called In Pursuit of Silence, and kind of sensitive and looking for what was next. And I was living in LA at the time and had a long drive to Mexico for a shoot, and listened to the Pete Holmes "You Made It Weird" with Dave on it.
Ooh,
And
so good.
yeah, so good. And I like, I had kind of lost track of Dave and Pedro, but had been a fan through the early records, and was just fucking floored by the way that he articulated his experience with faith and this changing of a worldview. In a way that like really struck me as something that I hadn't really seen covered well in art. I think that so many times, stories are told on either side of that fence, rather than kind of like right in the middle. And the way that he kind of made this experience available for other people throughout the process. And so anyway, I was just kind of blown away by that interview, and I went home, and I ended up downloading every single one of his lyrics for his songs, starting from the very first release to the most recent thing that had come out at that time. This was like 2016, I think. And he was doing like the monthly records. And I printed it all out, and I kind of bound a book. I actually have it somewhere here in my studio. But I kind of created a book because I really wanted to read it in one sitting as kind of this story. And like I've always thought of a feature length film as such a special piece of art in terms of like its form and its length and everything, where it's like there's just something about that, something that can be truly life-changing about this like hour and a half thing, or a one sitting kind of experience. And so I sat down and read through it and just saw this insane arc, that like you're saying, Andrew. I was just like, man, this has to be available for people, like without like going through and listening to all these records and having it's just like there's so much work to do to get to this gold. And I felt like maybe I could help create an opportunity or a way in, kind of pave a way into some of this genius in humanity, that's not quite available without like the full picture of the thing. And so I called up friend of a friend, knew Dave, and so we got connected, and I called up him and his manager Bob, and had a great conversation. It was funny because I referenced Wilco's documentary, I'm Trying to Break Your Heart, and in terms of just kind of like the access and the blah blah blah. It turns out Bob used to manage Uncle Tupelo and
Right.
Wow.
was very very much on the J side of things, and was just like, fuck that movie. And
It's amazing.
they like Tweety wasn't fucking puking because of that, like that everything was wrong in that, and blah blah blah. And I was like, oh shit, I didn't that's not why I was referencing it. But yeah, we had a great call, and then he was on a living room tour, and he came and played LA, and we had coffee and kind of started the process.
Was he receptive to the idea? Did it take some warming up? Was he like on board right away?
Yeah, he was cautious.
Sure.
I think that you know, I had been the fifth or sixth filmmaker that had kind of tried to court and start this process. And so I think he was, yeah, they were just kind of cautious where it's like, well, you know, as long as this or that. And yeah, the subject, you know, director relationship, and I'm sure we'll get into this as the conversation evolves, but you know, it's such a unwieldy beast and such an interesting, you know, kind of yeah, it's just it's a relationship unlike really any other I've experienced in life. And through the, you know, 6 or 7 films I've made, they're all so different in terms of what it takes for me as, you know, a human and a storyteller, and the boundaries of it all. And you know, it can get messy, you know, but it can also create, you know, something really special. So yeah.
You think there was something about the way that you wanted to present his story that was unique compared to maybe other filmmakers that had courted him? Or was it your filmmaking background in particular? Was it a combination of those things? Like, do you have a sense of what sort of committed him to this one?
I think it was kind of the pitch of what I was interested in, the angle, you know, that I was interested in. You know, and and you guys have been kind of steeped in this over the past couple months, but like, you know, that the period of those records, I think, is such a specific period in his development as an artist and a thinker and a person, you know, that like it was kind of perfect for a movie. You know, it's like he started a new chapter with these hometown records, you know, that go completely beyond the movie in a much different way. And I think maybe he had a feeling, you know, that was kind of happening, and he was kind of changing course a bit. You know, he had done the deconstruction, you know, and kind of before that became a big thing.
Right.
And I think he was ready to be on to a different conversation, but this was a really good way to kind of put it all into, you know, something that was available for a different audience.
Yeah, and I get a sense from going from Curse Your Branches and going through some of his solo stuff to the reuniting of Pedro that he's continued his own interpersonal work, and the deconstruction was part of it, but it's not the entirety of it. And you see a lot of that, the struggle and the work and what he's processing on these new albums. And he's not, doesn't seem like the kind of person who stays stagnant in what he's doing. I think he's constantly working and evolving, not just musically, but it seems like his interpersonal growth is kind of an important part of who he is. But I want to take a step back for a second before we get too into the weeds about Pedro. I want to get a little bit of background about you and becoming a filmmaker and and kind of your process. So, how did that start for you? How did you get into that? What were some of your influences? What launched you into this career?
It wasn't kind of like the Spielberg or P.T. Anderson story where it was like I always had a camera in my hand from when I was a little kid, and you know, blah blah blah. But I, you know, as soon as I kind of got the bandwidth to explore and, you know, start expressing myself, which was really like in college, like I was just trying to keep my head above water until I got into that kind of zone. And then this, you know, music has always been a huge part of my life, and, you know, formerly in bands and stuff. And yeah, this, when I started, you know, really kind of getting into film as a viewer, you know, like it just was so clear to me that this is like, you know, for my money, the most complete art form. Like they're, you know, they're with sound design and acting and set design and, you know, all of every art form, you know, is music, and every art form is available to be used. And so, and you know, documentary is kind of it's different, but all those things are still available. And so I began when I was in college, little college, like I went to a community college at first in Northern California, and just started, you know, kind of writing and making short films. And you know, that's when I kind of became like the always camera in my hand, you know, going to festivals and shit like that, and I would be, you know, like making a film about it. And yeah, it just felt like I was never, it became clear that I that was my way of communicating. People understood what I meant uh, the most fully when I put it into this format. Um, so yeah, I started shooting music pretty early on, and started kind of jumping on tour with bands and just kind of like doing it for free or cheap, and you know, really like kind of figured out my cinematic language through shooting live music, like just in terms of framing and kind of movement and energy. And you know, like it would be you know, shooting 4 or 5 nights a week, and just, you know, kind of like getting to make all the mistakes, and the, you know, stakes not being super high, and just kind of, you know, but it was always like to music. And yeah, then I kind of used that job as a way to make enough money to go to film school, and ended up at film school down in LA, and was able to kind of, you know, like really hone back into this kind of narrative world of filmmaking, that was just, you know, is still, you know, much harder and more unavailable in terms of like, um, you know, you can just start a documentary,
Right.
you know, and finance it as you go and make it up as you go, where in the narrative world, you know, there's a lot more that kind of goes into before you start shooting.
Yeah.
So yeah, then, you know, out of film school, kept shooting music, and started to collaborate with my frequent collaborator, this guy Patrick Shen, who I've made a few films with, and made the first film together was called La Source, which is about a Haitian man who is a janitor at Princeton University, and kind of this David and Goliath story of him trying to bring clean water back to his home village in Haiti, right after the earthquake. And so, you know, that was my first time, you know, kind of putting together a feature length, you know, documentary, and kind of understanding storytelling at that scale. And then, man, we made so many mistakes with that film, and we, you know, got talked into the fact that it was like gonna be like an Oscar movie. And so we, you know, spent a bunch of the budget like screening it theatrically in New York and LA, and we had Don Cheadle narrate it, and he fucking took all of our money and
Yeah.
and didn't do any, you know, like press for us. And you know, like it was just all these different things that kind of like, and then we went with a distributor that fell apart, and you know, like, so it was just very kind of like quick introduction to the harsh ass business of filmmaking.
Yeah. From the sort of music side that you had experience with, I mean, for folks who don't know, your brother is Eddie Vedder. Like, did you have was Pearl Jam like cutting your teeth on music filmmaking, or was it more like you were already working on filmmaking and then the opportunity arose and you were getting more experience that way? Like, what was that process?
Yeah, so actually Ed's my older cousin.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Cousin,
that's fine.
brother.
So yeah,
What have you.
him and his brothers, you know, they all growing up, they were kind of like, you know, our true north when it came to music. And
Yeah.
you know, they lived, we're all from Chicago, but we all kind of ended up in California, and they were down in San Diego and we were up north. And every once in a while we would kind of get these trips down to hang with them and like come back with all these new ideas and new records and blah blah blah. And then Ed actually lived with us for a little bit, when we were living in Tahoe on his way up to Seattle. And I, you know, I remember listening to like the first cassette, you know, from like one of his very, very first bands. So yeah, that was, you know, and we come from a pretty poor place, you know, in terms of our family, and pretty broken, you know, kind of family systems. If you've ever heard 10, you kind of
Sure. Yes.
you know. But you know, I think Ed, like being him, looking up to him and kind of watching him do it, was this gift to me in terms of just like it's possible, like you can do it, like you're not just, you know, like I don't know, I think, and I try to do that with my girls now, or try to figure out, I have two daughters, trying to figure out that kind of thing of like what unlocks this potential, and what gives you the kind of yeah, just the license to dream in a really big way. And for me, it was watching my older cousin like become, you know, this super famous rock star in, you know, in that time. And so yeah, and then after I had been shooting shows on a much smaller scale for a little while, Ed invited me to come shoot a concert film with them, and I was like 19 years old, and I was, you know, like the youngest guy by, you know, at least a decade, if not more. And you know, that was another massive, you know, kind of like learning experience in terms of just like, and I like, he didn't actually even talk to me until the very end of the tour, because he just, you know, like he didn't want it to be this nepotism thing.
Sure.
And so, you know, it was very much like sink or swim, and you know, it was very like, oh, fucking Ed's cousin, you know, like we got to
right.
deal with this kid. So, you know, and it was really rough at first, but now, you know, people that I still call really good friends. And one of the other things that I'll add, you know, just in terms of the music of it all, is like, you know, during high school, you know, like that curation and availability to all this amazing music kept going, because Ed and the band would do this thing called the Bridge School Benefit, which was put on by Neil Young, for his son's school. And it was this all acoustic concert that would happen in San Francisco. And we were living close enough to go. And, you know, it's like I got to see Tom Waits live, you know, and I got to see all, you know, this really interesting kind of mix of people that you know has, yeah, just gave me like the DNA that I needed to kind of understand storytelling through music. So yeah.
So how does the research, writing, filming process differ for a documentary versus something like a music video or a narrative film?
I've been working more in narrative stuff recently, and writing a lot more. And it's interesting because I find myself, the projects that I'm kind of pitching and writing on are still based in reality,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of retelling of certain things. So I don't, like I've never kind of seen myself as like a world building storyteller. Like I'm very, yeah, like I'm just so interested in the human condition, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't, yeah, like the metaphor of sci-fi or whatever it is, like has never really interested me as a storyteller. Obviously, as a viewer, love it all. But honestly, it's really similar, like, and I think that making documentaries professionally first, before I've kind of moved into this more narrative world, um has been so helpful, because I'm like, I know how to do research,
Right.
and I kind of understand in terms of that research what these emotional arcs and what's worth kind of understanding and including, and what's not. And then even just like in capturing and spending so many hours just filming real people and real situations, it's really sharpened my kind of instincts for truth and
Mm-hmm.
kind of real moments. So yeah, I think they they go hand in hand in a pretty cool way.
So I imagine your original concept or arc for a documentary has the potential for significant change, since you're filming
Yeah.
subjects in real time and news of the day may impact all of it. Do those decisions and changes happen during the filming process, or do you make that change in the editing bay?
That's one of the biggest things, is like in the narrative world, you make all these decisions beforehand, and then you kind of push everything into that box that you've created, whereas, and then you just edit it. Editing in a narrative sense is pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Like you have a script and you stick to that script.
Right.
Obviously, if it sucks, you fuck around and blah blah blah. But in the doc world, like, yeah, you have a loose kind of understanding of what you're trying to do, but you're also trying to capture reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're just kind of like getting all of the puzzle pieces. You're just, everything. You're just shooting every single thing, and then you really make the movie in the edit. But I think one of the biggest things is, because it's like there's so many stories, and there's so many, when talking about, any of the films could have gone in 100 million different ways.
Yeah.
But kind of understanding like the heartbeat of the story and what you're interested in bringing out and making available, I think is kind of strict as I like to be, because I don't know how that's going to come out and blossom. I just know, I just want kind of like, this is what I'm interested in. It's going to be up to the process to kind of see how we get there. Sensitivity is kind of the superpower, that you need the most when it comes to doc filmmaking, in my experience.
That makes sense, especially with this project where it gets so intimate. And I wondered, was that something you two had agreed on as an approach beforehand? Did it just kind of happen as part of making it? Because I mean, honesty is such a central aspect of Dave's art.
Right.
It's not a surprise that depicting that honesty
Yeah.
in the documentary was a major focus, but was that an intentional plan, or did it just come out that way?
It became pretty obvious pretty early that I wasn't going to be able to have a crew, that it was just going to be me.
Mhm.
And I didn't quite understand what that meant yet,
Sure.
then. but usually, and I've always kind of scaled up and scaled down in terms of crew stuff with my films or music videos or whatever. But usually, like, it's nice to have a sound person, and it's nice to have another camera, and it's nice to have some help. But it became pretty clear quickly that it was just going to be me when it came, if I wanted to make the film that I wanted to make. I think also kind of taking a page out of Dave's book in terms of just kind of like the DIY-ness of it all, and just kind of like, he loads in and loads out his own gear, and he drives himself from show to show. And for people that haven't seen the film, a lot of the film takes place on a house show tour, or a couple house show tours, and we really had a pretty similar rhythm. Mine actually much more gear, and
Sure.
it made a lot of sense that we would kind of be in the same rhythm and in kind of a solitary place, and yeah, just like doing the work. So I think, we never really talked about kind of like the expectations of intimacy or whatever, but I think, one of the first things that I kind of understood was necessary was that I don't want to do any sit down interviews, like kind of, a standard documentary would focus on, because it just didn't make sense. Like, I wanted to blur the lines between kind of fiction and documentary, and just like, yeah, I wanted it to be confusing in terms of perspective, in a way that would engage the audience. And so, I came up with the idea that I would just kind of set the car up as this interview booth, which is a fucking terrible idea, because it's just the hardest, sound wise and picture wise and everything. It's the hardest place to shoot, period. Like, I had to, like, tint the windows every time we did it, and like, run microphones everywhere, and like, stick cameras to the windows, and like this whole thing. But it was really important in terms of, like, again, it was about following his rhythm, and this is the place that he is most comfortable, honestly, like more comfortable than he is at home in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so, like, to get him in that space where he is so comfortable, and we just have hours to not get it right, before the expectations are to get it right, and to just find a rhythm, and it was like tough at first, and he was really kind of like like just kind of pushing back, and like, it took a while to get the rhythm of that. But I don't think, it was absolutely necessary to the intimacy that we were able to achieve, of to do it that way.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, was especially those car scenes, if it was a camera mount set up in there, or if there were times where you were in there with him. Because were you ever surprised at what you got from him in certain of those moments? Especially, I think about the scene where he's crying in the van, talking about, he's about how hard this is and how much he's away from his family, and he's, talks about it being a miscalculation and everything. When you see things like that, do you have, like, as a filmmaker, are you like, jackpot, or is there moments where you're like, maybe this is too personal or intimate to share with people?
Well, so just so you guys kind of know, and the listeners know, I would always sit in the front seat
Okay.
shotgun, and
Gotcha.
I had a camera mounted on the windshields back towards Dave, and then another camera mounted on the passenger window back towards Dave. I had those all kind of running into monitors, that were on the dash, in a way that Dave couldn't really see them, but I could. I didn't have to, I was obviously there's plenty of technical stuff that has to kind of be fucked with to keep everything together, but the idea was that I could just sit there and have a conversation and just capture. Yeah, I mean, it's so hard because you're just kind of constantly just taking in all of this data and
Mhm.
making sure that it's being captured correctly, and you're kind of making notes, and but also so much more thinking about like how to follow that question up, and how to you know whether to continue to give him time, to continue that thought, or to change a subject, because we also became very, very good friends during this process, and so I wanted to care for him as well, um, during these times, and respect the road that he was leading us down. And I was always very clear that I was never going to put anything in the movie that he was uncomfortable with.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, and because it was never going to be that kind of movie. It never had to have journalistic integrity. It's from his perspective, it's
Right.
his
Yeah.
point of view. So I wasn't really worried about that ethically. We worked to get to those points conversationally,
Mhm.
in a way that I think was felt pretty responsible.
Mhm.
I mean, at the center of a lot of those conversations are these concerns you're talking about um, faith, and how one chooses to let their beliefs or their worldview. Fruit is this theme that keeps coming up in the movie. What are
Hmm.
the fruits of our beliefs? How does that actually play out? And clearly, that was something on Dave's mind. Where in 2016, we were like, "Hey, the fruit of a lot of this American church does not seem to be bearing out in the way that one would hope here." So, can you talk a little bit about your background with that conversation? Like, if I'm not mistaken, you came to Pedro through sort of youth group culture, right? Like, what
Yeah.
was your experience with that scene?
That kind of came late in life for us. Yeah, it wasn't until high school really that I was introduced to youth group culture and the evangelical Christianity world. I mean, that was a peripheral thing. One of my grandmas was very religious and tried to, kind of instill that into my parents, but my parents were pretty wild. And even through us as kids, like life was pretty wild. So until we kind of landed in, Northern California, and kind of got some semblance of kind of a peaceful existence
Mhm.
in high school, that's kind of when like the youth group thing started, and was really compelling to me. Parts of it still very much are. And but that said, I in terms of this film, and as a documentarian, I was separate enough from the culture,
Mhm.
where I didn't grow up in it in a way that like Dave did, or it sounds like you guys did, that I could still look at as an anthropologist to a certain extent,
Sure.
kind of an outsider, but I had enough context with it to understand the nuance of it, and the rules. So yeah, it was kind of, and faith is the thing that I will continue making films about my entire life. Like
Mhm.
this is the thing that I'm most interested in. Humans' relationship with faith, is, yeah, that's kind of my central thing. So this was a really good, it was just this kind of beautiful way to ask these questions and to push on some of these things that I was already working through, with this person that knew how to express it in a way that, through both, just speaking, at his shows and his art, was really both really complex and helpful for me to do from kind of one step removed, or one step back rather.
Were there other bands or artists from that world, that culture, that were meaningful to you or that you stuck with, or was Pedro kind of one of the big ones?
Yeah, Pedro was one of the big ones. I was more into punk rock,
Yeah,
That's right.
those days.
Hell yeah. Who are you throwing down on?
It was very much like Op Ivy and
yes. Show
like,
that tat, Andrew.
hell yeah, hell yeah. Yeah. That whole early Rancid and
I have 2 tattoos on this arm, and they're both Op Ivy and Rancid tattoos. So
Beautiful.
you're speaking my language, brother.
You guys mentioned all of the Saddle Creek stuff, and that was, but that's like, faith adjacent. Yeah, not like Dave or not like you guys, where it's like that was all I was allowed to listen to.
Sure.
It was like Outcast on one side and like Op Ivy on the other side.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that we talk about a lot is how unique of a time that youth group culture was in the 90s, that
Yeah.
it doesn't really exist in the same way. John and I talk about how a lot of the bands that we listen to, like, learned about from other kids at youth group, and you go to youth group and you share music, or you go to shows with friends from youth group, and or that sort of thing. It's I don't know, it felt like a kind of a very specific moment in time that, with all of its problems within the evangelical church, there's still something it's very special about it, that we attempt to do our part to capture that that era by talking about these bands that were very profound to us during that period of time.
Totally. I mean, when I kind of understood what you guys were on with the podcast, it made perfect sense to me, because it is such a unique time, that I don't think is just kind of like nostalgic and special for us. I think in recent history, it's a really, the tides were changing, and there's so much complexity to it that I think is worth doing a bunch of podcasts about. So
There's a lot to unpack.
There is. I mean, that's why from the beginning we always said culture, religion, and politics as part of this conversation about music too, because I think part of what we're trying to do in our own way is not dissimilar to what you're doing in Strange Negotiations, where it's like where we're at in this country right now, culturally and in terms of religion and how that's impacted politics and stuff. Like, we can trace a lot of that back to sort of what was happening in the 90s for this evangelical sort of subculture. And the questions that you're asking in the documentary that Dave is asking about where we're at sort of nationally are similar to the things that I think we're interested in, sort of tracing back to what was this culture 20 years ago for us. How did this what might we have seen coming from paying attention to some of that stuff?
Well, and I think that we with the Trump of it all, we kind of reached this apex in terms of kind of like the end of the road for evangelical Christianity, in terms of being able to continue to pretend that its values still aligned with Jesus.
Right. Yep.
It became undeniable at that time that other things were being worshipped. And so like that really, I did a crazy amount of research on in preparation for this film, didn't use a ton of it. But it was incredible context, just like honestly from, the settling of America, and kind of pilgrim religion, and, this very apocalyptic version of Christianity, uh, until now. I started, kind of putting together this docu series called, I was calling Dominion, about, kind of just a history of American evangelicalism. And because again, it's all available, like it's all there, it just needs to be processed in a way. And I remember, looking at kind of the apocalyptic nature of early American religion, made me understand so much, of the current version of Christianity that is kind of not of this world. And that Christians, turn out to be the worst stewards of the earth, and like all these things, but it is, it's so tied to this old version of religion where Jesus was coming back. He was around every corner at any time. We don't, kind of, we're not of this world. And we've lost kind of all the bullshit kind of goes through generation to generation without the kind of container of, like most evangelical Christians don't think that Jesus is coming, tomorrow, but they also don't think that the environment, taking care of the environment, is a priority. And so, it's like this weird thing where you see these leftovers of older versions, outdated, some would say, but somehow the poison kind of keeps going through generations in a way where we're just like, we're at full poison now.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. That quote that Dave said, getting back to that tree metaphor, he said it's not a pruning issue, it's the seeds.
Yep.
The seeds are bad. You're talking about Brandon, his interview with Pete Holmes, and he has just such a has so many poignant things to say. I love how thoughtful he is and how insightful he is. You were able to capture so many wonderful, insightful nuggets in this film. I wanted to just talk about how beautiful I think the film is too, just visually, because it sometimes doesn't always feel like a documentary. The way that you talk about you wanting to blur the lines of things, and these big, lush, grand shots that you do of landscapes. The score, I don't know if it's all Bazan scoring or something, but there's so many eerie kind of moments and textures that you lay in throughout some of these shots that you make, and then these transitions that you'll do from these sort of like chaotic things, and then like a smash cut to like a quiet shot of Dave standing somewhere. And those are the moments to me that it feels like this doesn't feel like a documentary. This feels like we're watching the inside of a man's, chaotic mind. And then it just like, oh, now he's just standing by the gas pump and it's quiet. And I just think that sort of stuff to me is just makes it such a compelling film, and you make such amazing choices. And so I just wanted to appreciate that part of the film.
No, I take that to heart. Trying to make the right film, outside of form, is something that I try to take really seriously, based on each kind of subject and each character, where it's outside of convention. It's just kind of like what's the best version of this story, or what makes this beauty available the best? How do I pull the roadblocks away towards what I see to give it to other people as kind of quickly and painlessly as possible, and doubling down on kind of his perspective and trying to make it in his head. I'm so happy that came across for you. And again, with the interview setup, like, that was the conceit of that, was to get him in a place that he was so kind of comfortable in and automatic in, that and he's looking forward, so it's just kind of like, it's very much like inside his head is the idea. And so but I'm so happy to hear that the kind of editing choices and soundtrack and stuff helped that, because it did feel like that was inside his head. And honestly, one of the interesting things that we did when it came to scoring the film was Sean Lane, who used to play drums in the band for a time, created this instrument called the bike. And it's a bike frame that he's kind of electrified and put all of these different like cymbals and bowstrings and all this stuff that he can run through pedals. And it's just like this insane, really, like, in terms of the range of sound he's able to get, it's incredible. And we did a live score session with him where Dave was telling him what it sounded like in his head.
Wow.
And so we watched the movie, and Dave told Sean how to kind of represent how he felt. And it was fascinating. And then, when we ended up mixing the film, we had this really kind of, authentic version of that to kind of dip in and out of, in the mix when we needed it.
That is super cool.
That is amazing.
I think Sean
I need to see a picture of this,
of the bike.
It makes me think of like this, some sort of like Mary Poppins situation. Like, is it like a
So-
one-man band sort of thing, or what's going on?
Totally. No. There's videos online of it. Sean Lane, the bike. Yeah.
I think he's credited as Bike on Phoenix at some point, and I'm like, I never really understood. I thought it was some sort of yellow bike thing, but I'm like, oh, now it makes more sense.
Yep.
That rules. Yeah, I agree. Like, it's not a given that a music documentary be beautifully made. So it's like striking that there were artful ways that you chose to tell his story. And I think it stands out in that world. I think particularly of the footage in it that's also in the video you did for the Trouble with Boys song. I wasn't sure if you used stuff for the movie that ended up in the video, or used stuff for the video put in the movie, but him sort of like tearfully standing there, and you talked about like structuring it almost in like a narrative way. Like there's that stuff, there's footage of Dave's family without him that almost serves as like flashbacks to what he's missing. And again, that just feels very cinematic for a music documentary. Was the idea of capturing his family and structuring the film's arc in that way always part of the vision? Like what was that process for you?
Yeah, that was hard because Anne, Dave's ex-wife now, wasn't super comfortable with me shooting.
Sure.
And just kind of, was like, I don't know how well it was all explained, but it was just kind of like another Dave thing. And this guy is here, and I'm just trying to run this family, and and it makes total sense, where it's just like, that's another pain in the ass. And obviously we got to be friends through the process, and she became much more comfortable with it. But one of the early things that I did was I made good friends with Andy Fitz, who's another musician up in Seattle that was living with Dave at the time. And he was making wedding films, and he's an incredible artist, and his records are incredible. I don't know if you guys know them, but so I sent him up a camera, and I was just like, yo, just shoot, like just shoot whatever, and because I'm not gonna have the access that you're gonna have, and as long as everyone's comfortable, just shoot, and it ended up working out in a really interesting way, because like, there's all this footage of them, kind of like picking blueberries, I think. And I didn't shoot that. Andy shot that, and he didn't know how to use the camera exactly yet. So it's all super overexposed,
It
which
works
is
though.
really blown out,
Yeah.
like really light. And yeah, but I'd like, it ended up being this thing where it's just like, this makes so much sense. This feels like a first person point of view rather than kind of like, carefully framed shots. And then, it just felt dreamy in this really cool way. And that's kind of, like, that's one of my favorite things about doc filmmaking, is just kind of like making shit work and finding a way for it to be cooler than if you had planned on it, using those limitations. And then with the Trouble with Boys thing, that was we just kind of came up with this idea to make a video, because Panasonic had sent me this crazy camera to test out, that had like some really good slow motion features. And so while we were on one of the tours, and I just fucking loved that song. Like it really hit me, that version of it especially. And so yeah, came up with that idea, and then made that video, which was funny because it was like, we shot, Eleanor stuff, his daughter, at a different time than when we shot the him in the mirror stuff, and that we were in like New Jersey or something. And I'm calling around to all these hotels asking for the specific mirror with lights around. And everyone, like everyone thought that this was going to be like a porn or something,
naturally.
And but we ended up, just doing that, for the video. Dave listened to Andy Schaaf's record and was able to kind of get there. And then I just, and then I had that footage. Yeah, it just kind of made sense to reuse it in that way. And I try not to be too precious about that kind of stuff, where it's just like whatever works, throw it at it, whether it's, like a Super 8 or 4K or whatever. Like it's about the moment rather than kind of like continuity.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Andrew, the drone shots. I mean, that's such a central element to the storytelling. Like I presume these are Dave's car that we're following through some of those, at least, and these winding roads and these landscapes. How did you plan that out? How did that work?
Yeah, that was tough, because that was kind of before drones were like super easily accessible. So this was like this Chinese drone called Unique. Yeah, the idea there was just kind of like, all right, we're traveling all across the country. Like, how do we tell the story of these places in a way that's like different than just kind of like the road movie out the window, same kind of shots. Like this is it's really important to kind of establish how radically different these landscapes are. And then also there's kind of this omnipotent point of view of looking down at him, and just like him being so small in the frame. And like I kind of knew pretty early on, like I wanted to be pretty extreme with focal distances, and either be really close and really up in his face and his space, and then really, really far away. And making everything feel really immediate and devastating, but then also kind of like getting perspective of, just kind of like, this is just one dude in the world and no one else knows he's going through this and blah blah blah. So yeah, and Dave it was patient enough to, kind of make that happen. Where we would, and this is one trip that I did have a crew member with me, my very good friend Colin Micah, who I went to film school with, who's a genius cinematographer. And he was really kind of like, he really set up like all the car mount shots and like that was really his world. And then, kind of in terms of with the drone stuff, we would kind of like race forward, and a lot of Google Earth, kind
Okay,
of
yeah.
like understanding what the it would look like from 400 feet above. And it was a messy yeah.
I can
Well,
believe it. I'm like, how did you
yeah.
choose routes based on how aesthetically interesting they
Oh
were?
man,
Like,
that
Yeah.
the one with like it's hard to describe, like the sort of the roads going like this, sort of like through the trees, and then
Yeah.
it like sort of winds around, and you see. I mean, like some of these shots are just so. It also gave me a sense of isolation and loneliness, because it's like so often it's like just him on these long stretches of road. So
Totally.
that made me feel like this is another story being told here. Here's, you know, it's obviously Dave is talking about it, but then you just have the visuals of like, a man by himself in a van, and um as as cinematic as they are, um still a lonely place to be.
there's also amazing footage of Dave performing Lord, I Lift Your Name on High in a church worship band. What was the
Yes.
process of going through like sort of family archival footage? How did that work?
Oh man, I like there's just about every format of film and video that has ever existed in this thing. And a lot of it was, the Kickstarter campaign was really helpful in terms of like, people coming out of the woodwork and offering up footage, and kind of creating like, just like starting to create a relationship with this diehard audience from pretty early on, because most of the footage came from fans.
Wow.
Some, like Ben Brubaker, who was in the band for a while, like had some Super 8 that he had shot. And Dave, kind of like on my first trip up there, he just gave me this bag full of, like mini DV tapes. And I remember at the point, because I knew that he knew that the Cornerstone stuff was in that bag, and his then wife was like, "Are you sure you just want to like give him all that shit?"
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Luckily, it's kind of at the beginning of video cameras being available, where people were shooting stuff.
Yeah.
So you mentioned some, obviously the diehard Pedro fans, providing a lot of the footage and backing, giant nerds like John here backing the project. Did you at any point did you feel like this, when it like became super real, when they backed it, that you're like a sense of responsibility for these diehard fans, that you're just like, I have to come through like in a serious way for this film, or they will eat me alive?
Yeah, I mean, that's like, we raised an incredible amount, like 100 grand, through
Amazing.
fans, and that's just like, that's a lot of money.
Mhm.
and
Don Cheadle money.
Seriously, learn that
soon.
lesson. And so yeah, there definitely was a kind of just this awe at first, and then this responsibility of being a good steward of people's real money. But outside of that, I tried to kind of separate myself from it in terms of anyone's expectations. Or I also, I wanted to make the movie from my perspective as well, where it's just like, this is what turns me on about this shit. And like, I remember in the first episode, you guys are talking about big trucks and how it didn't really do anything for you guys. And I feel the same way. Like like I just don't fucking dig that song. And and Dave still loves it, and he still plays it. And like was playing it a bunch during that time. And I remember people being so bummed that I didn't put that in the movie at some point, because it was like this foundational song for them. And it's like, nah, man, like it's a complete piece, where it's like, it's kind of like a movie becomes a house of cards to a certain extent, where it's like, if you pull one thing out, it all comes crashing down. And if you make one move that's not, towards the kind of heartbeat or North Star, then everything starts falling apart. And so I tried to kind of suspend my duty to the fans in a way that I thought would honor them even more.
Yeah, I mean, speaking on behalf of the fans, I'm fine with big trucks not being in it. But I did want to ask about, I mean, I feel like the song choices that you made is another sort of cinematic aspect of the movie. Because Permanent Record, the version that's on the monthly collection, like, as the first time I heard it, I was like, this is such a good, like, cinematic song. It should be in a movie, or there should be a video for it. And so, like, I was so glad that it opens with that. It's just like that burn of the bass immediately. It's just like, whoa, like something's happening. So I love that song's in it. I love that it closes with It Goes, which is also a monthly song that I don't think that many people know, but it's just such a cool, like, I don't know, there's something about, like, it feels sort of triumphant, but it's also like what you're saying about, like, this process keeps going, he's going to go back on the road, and I don't know, I was moved by the choices that you did make. I mean, Slow and Steady is probably my favorite Pedro song ever. And the fact that we get that, solo acoustic young Dave in the record store playing it, and then we close with this, like, triumphant full band version. I'm like, bookending the thing with that song.
So good.
Was great. So how did you have a process for, like, how you decided what Dave songs you wanted to use?
Well, early on with that kind of novelization of his lyrics that I made, I did kind of all these different passes of it, in terms of kind of like how to tell the story through, because that's the other thing, that I really wanted to get meta on in a way that, no one would really notice. But if you listen to just the music and just the lyrics that are in the performed songs, or the non-diegetic songs, it tells the same story. And it's all there, like you could just, and we wanted to do a soundtrack release for a long time, because there was so much put into that, but we just it just never came to fruition. But first of all, it was like, do I like this song or not? Like, because there's plenty of songs that, like, kind of do the lifting, but I just don't dig, and it doesn't, like, vibe wise, it just didn't fit, or tone wise, or whatever. So that was kind of my first thing. And then it was kind of like how to tell the story through these lyrics, and taking history into account, and kind of his progression into account, having these eras of varying levels of belief and disbelief, you know, was really helpful in terms of kind of structuring it, because it was we had to kind of follow that trajectory.
I mean, you kind of talked about the anthropologist approach to this in a way. I mean, Bazan's music and the shows he puts on have always been kind of like a safe space for wanderers. That's sort of his deal. Is, you know, these living room shows can fill the space as a kind of church experience for people who've maybe left church and are missing that. And I think the movie captures that really well. It's a unique setting, and the concerns that the people who have who come to those, I think, are unique. And like, could you talk about the experience of capturing those shows? Is that a primary piece of what you imagined the documentary would be? Is those experiences, or is that just kind of where Dave was at? How did that work?
No, that was pretty foundational, because it was so unique, you know, and it was like, I mean, it's a fucking Bible study,
right?
Know?
Yeah, exactly.
It's very much his own, you know, he's using these tools and this culture, you know, and that's one of the things that I've always loved and been attracted to in terms of Dave's intellectual kind of relationship with all these questions and this history of questioning, is that, you know, like, he's not too quick to throw the baby out with the bathwater, where it's like, there are really helpful and really beautiful things about this tradition that you know, deserve to be interrogated, and, you know, are potentially useful in a lot of different ways. And so, you know, I love that he kind of he didn't make a complete, you know, 180 and just like, fuck all of this,
Right.
I'm starting something new, I'm a completely different person. It's kind of like, well, what's helpful out of this? You know, like, there's an intimacy to this Bible study thing and this community thing that really works. And, you know, I think that kind of led that. And so that was really exciting to me, seeing that, because that was the first thing I actually saw after I pitched the film to them. I went and saw him do a house show thing in like Orange County or something, and that became quickly kind of like the plot, because it was also just kind of this, you know, like, really cinematic thing where it's like, homies selling records out of the back of his van.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, literally.
Yeah.
And driving himself to the show and loading in and loading out and blah blah blah. You know, and then the opportunity to include the voices of this generation of you know, people wrestling with this thing that's, you know, like, I think a very, as the entire podcast gets to, is a very kind of special and helpful and damaged you know, cohort of people that hopefully can, you know, change the trajectory of all of this stuff, because there's so many tools that I think that we've gotten from this, as well as, you know, a lot of other stuff. But, you know, so making that available and kind of, you know, highlighting some of these conversations that I would hear over and over again within these settings was just became, you know, of utmost importance.
As the anthropologist, and speaking of these house shows, I gotta imagine, or maybe you're an absolute professional and you know how to just like blend into the background, but as we've talked about on the pod before, in the past, there's, you know, John has talked about some of his embarrassing questions that he's thrown out in the moments when Dave asks if anybody has any questions. I've got to imagine that you captured some moments of people trying to, you know, whether it's corner Dave about it or something, or ask a question that you're just like, oof, were there moments in those questions that stand out to you, whether it was cringy or profound or moving?
By the time I started shooting, it was in a bit of a different space than I heard you guys kind of talk about seeing him early on. And I remember that too. Like I remember seeing him in Pomona way back, and you know, these are you still a Christian questions and blah blah blah. And we see that in the film. The
Yeah, there's
funny
one of
thing,
those in there. Yeah.
It's a
funny,
bummer. Why are you so bitter?
Oh, that one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
oh dude.
That because that was at one of the house shows. I was
Right,
like,
right.
Yeah.
that just made me my butthole pucker. I'm just like, ugh.
Yeah, it's so there wasn't a ton of that, to be honest, because everyone kind of knew what was happening and everyone was kind of on board.
That's a relief.
Yeah, and so there wasn't a ton of gotcha type stuff. Or yeah, you know, it's like and Dave's he's just a master at cultivating this kind of openness and a, a a vibe and a tone of kind of acceptance, and just kind of, you know, it's like he's never, yeah, I don't know, he creates, he's a master at kind of creating a really special safe space, even if people are being jackasses and trying to kind of corner him. He has the goodwill and a way of controlling that never really got out of control. Funny thing about the kid that asked the, you know, who is Jesus to you, or whatever that question was, he was at the South by Southwest premiere.
Shit.
We premiered in this massive Paramount theater in Austin, and he asked a question afterwards, and he said, where was that show? And Dave remembered, and he's like, I have to apologize, that was me, I asked that question. And he's like, I've come a long way, and I've changed a lot since then, and you've been a massive part of that change.
Wow.
And he ended up helping with the film. Actually, he was like a social media marketing dude, and a guy named Ben, and he was really helpful with the film after that. But
That's
you know,
beautiful. I love that.
That kind of long-term
Yeah.
thing is like, it's just not that rare when it comes to Dave and his relationship to his fans. And
yeah, he's got such a grace of dealing with so many. I mean, he obviously opens himself up to it, so he is prepared on some level for the questions that he gets. But like, I've seen him answer the question, you know, what's your relationship to Jesus, or whatever version of that, so many times. And his one there where he just kind of leaned past the mic and was like, that's a private conversation. The guy's like, okay. And then even when the woman who's like, why'd you get so bitter after the Holy Pete, he's like, oh, I'm not bitter at all. Like, that tone of sort of, I was telling Andrew, I just saw him a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the importance of wearing masks, and someone in the crowd was like, play another song, and he was like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking right now, like, where you can tell he's like, fucking, can you cool it? But he's doing it in this way that's very like, I'm leading this conversation in a gracious way.
Totally.
It's such a special piece, always has been, of the Bazan experience, is how he engages with fans and is so willing to come at these questions at the same level of the people who are asking them. So I was happy that was such a piece of it. I wanted to ask about, obviously a major piece of the film is the decision that Dave makes to bring Pedro back together. And that came while you were shooting, right? Like late in the process.
Yeah.
How did that, like, if Pedro hadn't gotten back together, how did you imagine the film ending? And then how did you sort of revise from there?
Yeah, I mean, that I thought that I was done,
right,
without kind of a really good ending, you know. And that's the hard thing, is like, you never know what the ending is going to be, and you just kind of have to faithfully follow, you know. And so I remember when he came up with the idea, And I was obviously just like, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yes, do that. But it was also kind of, there's a congruity to it, that he talks about in the film that I think has been really helpful for him to get through things. And a massive part of the film that didn't make it in was probably this whole 20-minute section on just like all these band members that got burned, that like there's like 25 band members over the years, and Dave was really dealing with the fallout of that and kind of understanding that he was the common denominator there. And just that, how shitty that had been. And I think it was a very healing thing for him to kind of realize that like Pedro was kind of, always him. And it, there were versions of it. That, but it was like, it was always, even watching the footage from way back, and obviously TW is such a massive voice in it. And, was such a big part of those records. But yeah, I think that for Dave to kind of go back and realize that after he had kind of been like, 10 different band names and blah, 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 like to just be like, to go home, and home becomes such a big thematic element in the film, that it just was like, so, just, it landed so well when he was like, I think that I'm going to do this. And, it was like, okay, that's the movie.
Right. So when he made that decision, how much more time did that add on to the movie making?
A little while, because then it was, I mean, there's so much that didn't make it in the film. And so it's hard to remember what was what, but
Streets are talking about a director's cut. That's what I'm hearing them say.
Oh man, I wish that enough people saw this film like that. I mean, it's still like on Amazon, it still does pretty decent, but it's a hard thing where it's like releasing films is so hard right now. And the way that I kind of decided to do it, and it's just it's a hard, I still have hope that it will kind of find an audience. And I mean, I'm absolutely thrilled with people's response and reaction thus far. But I hope one day there's a need for a director's cut.
I hope so too.
And that vinyl release soundtrack that you'll
yes,
do.
please support that. I have to say, like, I was initially surprised when I heard about Pedro reuniting. Like, I was a little taken aback, where I was like, I really like the sound and sort of identity he's been building up as a solo artist. So I was a little bit like, why? I mean, I probably had some sense of the like financial piece of it, but I was like, I understand the logic of it so much better after having watched the movie. I mean, you captured the toll that the solitude and the choice to tour by himself took on him and his family. And that piece of it is obvious, but also his articulating of like, he wants to play with drums and bass and he wants to do this with other people, and he wants to be in a band, like connecting with others on a personal level and musically. Just, I was like, oh, I completely get it now. So it made a lot more sense. But was that something that you, like, when he came to that conclusion, were you like, oh, well, that's the perfect sort of culmination of the story I've been telling here? Did it just work out?
I mean, I think I flew right up, and we drove around a bunch and talked about it just around Seattle with the same kind of interview setup. And it was just this really, it was kind of like he did his years wandering in the desert. And it was time to do something else. And so that was it was pretty exciting because it was, you know, I couldn't have really asked for a better, other than, you know, some people wanted him to become a Christian again or whatever at the end of the movie.
Right.
But you know,
I
I
feel like that
think
would undermine so much of what was being the story that was being told.
everything. Yeah, yeah, totally. You know, and I think that it's, and I got a lot of that, you know, like from Christian people as I was touring the film, you know, that I got kind of, you know, more hate than Dave would at his shows, just in terms of like, why are you promoting this questioning? Why are you, you know, yeah, just that this is dangerous, this is, why would you make a film about this, you know, blah blah blah. And it's just kind of like, man, because this is the whole thing, you know, like,
Yeah.
have you read the Bible, you know, like, this is the Psalms, this is, you know, like, this is it,
Yeah.
you know, and yeah, just like, but I don't know, the kind of sheltering ourselves from this kind of discourse has never made any sense to me. And um so I was a little surprised, you know, when there was some kind of blowback, and you know, people um you know, at screenings, you know, kind of would take me to task over my motivations and stuff like that. But you know, it ends up making sense because of you know, because of evangelicalism. You know,
Right.
so
You know, it's like Dave said in the movie. He said God can't be hurt by your questions.
right.
So the fact that people uh, are afraid of asking questions says more about their fear than what it means about God or what it could do to God. I think
Yeah,
at the root of so much evangelicalism is a fear, which is what so much of the far right and people like Trump appealed to is a lot of those base fears. So,
totally.
you know, pulling those threads is a scary thing, and I think illuminating and normalizing the fact that people of faith can still be Christians while asking questions, and that that's not a terrible thing to do,
Well,
and it makes people feel
what
less
a,
alone.
yeah, what a weird thing that that's the narrative now, where it's just kind of like, you know, for all of, you know, kind of recorded history, you know, in terms of religious history, this has been one of the core tenets of uh, faith, you know, is wrestling and questioning. And look at the Jewish tradition, you know,
Oh,
it's
for
just like
sure.
how it's such a it feels like forever because this is the only version we've known. But you go back even one generation or a couple of generations, and this is a uniquely, you know, kind of American Western
Hmm.
recent addition to the canon,
Yeah.
is this, you know, kind of fear. And obviously it's taken different forms over, you know, as it's evolved. But yeah, it's so weird that it's just kind of accepted as you know, yeah, just whatever.
Yeah. The wrestling, the questioning, the honesty of that is so much of what has drawn people to Dave's music, and has, you know, instilled that devoted following. And I think the movie does the same thing. Like it's another expression of a way to wrestle with things. And I'm sure people will find, I hope people find the movie who don't even know anything about Dave and are moved by
Yeah.
a story about asking those questions.
Yeah.
And you know, the fact that you end it with this like beautiful kind of closing monologue that Dave has, where he's talking about he's still finding himself reaching out for something. You know, what if
Mm,
the divine is just balance itself? Harmony is where we experience transcendence. Like
Yeah.
and that he's hesitant to put a label on it because that's where you get into trouble. But like, I love that he ends in that place of sort of looping back around in a way to expressing what sort of he finds, where he finds sort of divinity. And I was just going to ask, like, what was it like to see him articulate his shifting views on faith, on the world in sort of real time over the course of several years, where there was a lot of things happening in his life and in the country? Like, what was that? What was it like to see him do that?
Yeah. It's such a, that time, it was, to be perfectly honest, like it was pretty rough making the film. It was pretty dark, you know, and really pretty dark and pretty focused. You know, whereas like I was piecing everything together, you know, it's, you know, like trying to build a ship, you know, while you're already out at sea most of the time. And then just kind of like you know, it's hard because it was just surviving, you know, like you're just kind of like trying to get, especially because it was just me and just him, you know, and he's a heavy motherfucker, you know. It's like it's you know, it weighs pretty heavy to be kind of in that therapist position, you know. And so I mean, honestly, like it's taken a little while to not get over it, but to process and kind of I don't know,
like decompress or something.
Just kind of make it was, you know, and even in the post process, like editing the film, you know, it was like that was rough too, because, you know, like I mean, there was times that we were screaming at each other, you know. And so, you know, it's like there was never like it was pretty intense and prickly and you know, like just rough a lot of the time. So I think, you know, but also fucking beautiful. And you know, it was like but I was really going through it with him, in a weird way, because we didn't know each other before that. But then, you know, it's like we were kind of on this thing together and connected. So I think it was a relief, you know, that as a friend, you know, and just someone, like that had gone on a lot of this journey with him. Like there there really was some peace, you know, and him again, not just saying I'm just focused on, you know, the earth and what I can see and blah blah blah, and just throwing everything away that it goes outside of our understanding. It was really comforting and helpful, because, you know, I want that for him. I want him to continue to think, as he says in the film, outside of the back of his head, you know, that consciousness is bigger than that, because the world needs it. And so it was encouraging, but it was also just kind of like we were both just so tired at that point. You know?
Well, thank you for doing the hard work of making a tough movie that I think asks hard questions, but it does. The sense of like peace and sort of triumph feels hard won at the end of it, and it's meaningful to see. So
that's so cool to hear.
Thank you for this movie, Brandon. Thank you for taking the time today. I could keep talking all night long. We want to respect your time. But is there anything you're working on now that you want to promote or plug, or is there anything you want to direct folks to?
Yeah, not quite yet. I mean, what? Well, I don't know. It's like making a living doing this thing is a game of keeping as many kind of irons in the fire as you can.
Sure.
And one of those projects will kind of pay the mortgage every once in a while. And so yeah, I'm working on another documentary right now. Probably the thing that is the most, well, yeah, we're kind of halfway through shooting it. It's called As Slow as Possible, which sounds riveting, I know.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, but it's about time and humans' relationship to time and the passage of time. And it's very interested in long-term thinking and kind of what they call cathedral thinking, where multi-generational efforts and projects, and how we as a society have gotten um, really far away from that kind of thinking, and the the kind of consequences of that, that I think we're experiencing today. So but it's a crazy weird art film with no interviews or anything. And the kind of backbone of the film is this piece of music that's being played over 639 years in this ancient church in Germany.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the experimental composer John Cage.
Yeah.
He wrote this piece of music called As Slow as Possible for piano, which obviously, and the notation suggests you play it as slow as possible. But then and piano obviously has a natural decay. Before he died, he recomposes it for organ, which can be played indefinitely. And so there's this crazy project that's playing it over 639 years. And it's this really interesting thing because anywhere from like 9 months to 7 years is a chord change. And people make this pilgrimage, kind of from all over the world to watch these chord changes. And it's just it's this really fascinating kind of explosion of past, present, and future when you're in that space. And just kind of understanding that if all goes well, this will be playing for another 600 years, and that it's already been playing for this long, and that you're in this moment right now hearing this chord. So that and the kind of keeper of that project, and that project is one element of it. And then there's a gentleman in Iceland that kind of represents another element of it, that's very focused on kind of the ice monsters of glaciers, and the relationship between Iceland and kind of these glaciers, and the fact that they are starting to die. The first one died, lost its status as a glacier just over the last couple of years. And it's this really interesting thing because there's so many mythic kind of just Nordic storytelling that's based around these ice monsters. And we're watching this kind of geological time be compressed into human time due to global warming. And so actually I was just up at we got to shoot at this place called the Allen Telescope Array, which is run by NASA and this company called SETI, which stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And they are using these radio telescopes to scan the cosmos for intelligent life. And so the idea there is, so anyway, yeah, it's kind of this braiding together of all of these different narratives that have to do with long-term thinking. So yeah,
That's amazing.
That sounds awesome, man.
I love
I
the sound of
cannot
that.
wait to see this. When we
Yeah.
do our John Cage season, we'll have you come back on and talk about it.
Yes,
No, that rules. I can't wait to hear more about how that comes together.
totally. Yeah.
In the meantime, folks can rent or buy Strange Negotiations on Amazon Prime Video. Yeah, check out Brandon Vedder's work. All Cut Up Films. Yeah.
Yep.
I do have one more question.
Yeah,
man.
Coming up in the episode, John and I are going to talk about. We're going to do our best to rank the Pedro discography.
Ooh,
Do you have a sense of what your favorite Pedro record is?
that's so hard.
I know,
'cause-
dude. I know.
Well, the
It-
thing that you guys have touched on a couple times is just like the discrepancy between solo stuff and headphone stuff.
Yeah.
And, blah blah blah, where it's like it becomes really difficult because those are really important records to me. But I don't, there's something really special about Control.
Mhm.
Where it's like it was punk rock enough to kind of get me, to go back, and there's enough fuck you and enough, like the drums are just insane on that
Drums are the
record.
best.
Yeah, they are.
And so that's, for me, and I love watching, now Dave go through like Phoenix and Havasu and the upcoming records, and kind of like it's just such a different thing that he's doing now. It might as well be called something different because it's a whole different project in a really cool way. But yeah, I think that's that's what got me on this journey. So yeah, I think that's my one.
Awesome.
Good
Love
luck.
it.
Good luck to you guys.
Yeah, thank you. It's going to be a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks again, Brandon. This is great.
Yeah, it's so fun.
He's not wrong about those drums.
No.
Many thanks to special guest Brandon Vedder. Dude rules. He made a great movie. We had a great conversation. Please go check out Strange Negotiations if you haven't yet. Yeah, loved getting into it with him.
Yes.
We've got some things to get into ourselves.
Oof, we sure do. This is going to be painful because I was texting you today about how unfair it is to try and rank these records because but we'll get into it.
Our album rankings, our set lists, much possible controversy therein.
Oh yes.
Coming up after the break.
Yeah.
Pickles, Boots, Podcast, Relax, Pickle and Boot Shop, a new podcast on the Rock Candy Network. Relax, with your hosts Joe Yoki and Reese Roper. It's time to touch your own body. Feel the tension melting away. What was that noise? It's time to get in touch with yourself.
Hey John.
Hey.
Have you heard of Small Step Records?
The name is familiar, but tell me more.
Well, Small Step Records is a faith-based DIY record label with bands that are melodic punk, pop punk, easy core, emo, and ska. And they have some new albums and new bands releasing records right now on all streaming services. You should check them out.
Andrew, not only that,
Ooh.
they are Magpod's first official sponsor.
Oh, really?
Starburst got nothing on these guys. All right. These guys are the real deal. The tagline is love God, love others, listen to pop punk. You can go to smallsteprecords.com, check out the cool records and merch and bands they have, and we will be, through their generosity, offering some giveaways in the coming weeks and months on our socials of some of these Small Step Band's records. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Also, John, unlike some record labels, which may have come up over the course of the podcast, the artists on Small Step always keep 100% of the rights and ownership of their music.
Yes.
So any money that goes to Small Step goes directly back into supporting the bands. This is a label with integrity, so you love to see it.
Love to see it. Small Step. Check them out.
SmallStepRecords.com.
Beautiful.
We're back.
Yes.
We're talking top Pedro records, talking Pedro set lists, talking many Sophie's choices.
Indeed.
Over here.
Yes.
I texted you earlier today, and I'm pretty sure I said, this is a very tough list. It feels unfair. And because anywhere I put any of the albums feels like it should be higher.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't, where I put certain albums, I'm like, it feels wrong to have any album not like high, because it just feels like it's like diminishing the work somehow. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes.
Even though that's not what we're trying to do. It feels. Yeah,
it's a tough. This is why they pay us the big bucks, to make these life or death calls.
I know.
Yeah, we're purely doing the 6 Pedro LPs for our album rankings. There's no EPs. There's no Bazan solo stuff. It would be much more complicated with all that involved. It's hard enough as it is, but I kind of feel the same way about this as I do about any of the songs on Curse Your Branches, where I said kind of any of them could be my number one. Pretty much any of these albums could also be my number one. I love them all very much.
I know.
I don't really, as I said, if we were throwing in non-Pedro stuff, Curse Your Branches probably would be at the top of my list.
Probably.
But it's not in there today. Okay. But we are doing our set lists as well. Yeah. And I may have broken some rules on that front. We'll get into that where things maybe got a little blurred. But I'm keeping to the rules as defined for our album rankings, at least.
Yeah. We both bent the rules a little bit for the 10 song set list, and we'll we'll explain that when we get there. But
yes,
John, should we just get into it? Should we not delay any longer?
So I mean, we'll just say for any folks who are new this season, at the end of a little mini series of a band we're covering, we always like to rank the albums we've covered. We also like to throw together a little 10 song set list, imagining, hey, if we had the opportunity to put together a short, festival-ish length set for these bands that we're covering, what would we want to throw in there? So that's the challenge we put before ourselves.
Yeah. And John and I historically have had very different approaches to this. Like mine have always been like the most unrealistic stuff that
that's what you're getting from me today. So but continue.
Hell yeah.
The tables have turned a little bit this season, where I'm like, this is the hardest rankings and set lists, because it's literally like my favorite albums and bands. So I'm like, I went full like just weird set on this one, but
super deep cuts.
Well, yeah, we'll get there.
Okay. All right.
For albums though,
yes.
Should we trade off places?
Yeah, we got to start. We'll start number
last,
6.
Work our way up.
Yeah, but like when we say last,
sorry,
clarification.
Final.
we'll say the 6th, not meaning, not indication of like the least or the worst or it's bad or anything. Just
indeed.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go first because I have a lot of feelings. Not that you don't, but this was one thing that we talked about. I've mentioned this like every episode. I'm like, it's gonna be really interesting when we do our album rankings.
Yeah.
I feel like I had a sense of what they were before we started.
Yeah.
And that's what they are for me today, even after all my hemming and hawing. I think at the end of the day, when I really went back through them and thought about them, they pretty much worked out the way that I thought they would. So all that to say, number 6 is Phoenix, which breaks my heart.
Okay.
I think when we talked about Phoenix, I was like, if I had to guess, this would be my lowest ranked Pedro record. Not because I don't love it, which I do, just because the 2 newer ones are still working their way through my list. As we've talked about with a lot of the bands we've covered, some of the stuff is 20 plus years old and has had a special place in my heart for a long time. It's hard for new stuff, even if it may be objectively better, as possibly Havasu and Phoenix are. I think he's doing some of the most interesting musical stuff he's ever done. It's just not going to usurp those top spots. I love Phoenix. I think, we've talked about this a lot. When it came out, I was a little taken aback, as I was, as we talked about with Brandon, just with Pedro coming back together. I was a little bit thrown by moving from Bazan, which was doing this cool synthy stuff I was into, to Pedro, and then kind of, much more electric guitar driven rock. It took me a minute to settle into it, but once we talked through it, in particular, I really, really grew to love this record. So it may be in 6th place here, but I still, again, if you were like, there was a point where I was like, is Phoenix my favorite? So who knows? It's 6 for now, but that's that's where I'm at these days.
Some of mine surprised me, because as I was putting them in order, some albums which were up higher dropped several spots, just as I was thinking about what it is about the records that I find meaningful and how they have impacted me over these months. So my number 6 is It's Hard to Find a Friend.
Okay.
Primarily because there aren't a lot of songs on that record that hit me in a lot of the ways that some of the others in his forthcoming records did. Do I love Secret of the Easy Yoke? Absolutely. It was a very profound song when we talked about it, and there's some songs on here I think that are really interesting, and they tell some really interesting narratives, but I do think that in later albums he kind of gets the narrative and the more of the concept album thing nailed down more. And so it's not one that I find myself returning to the most. So I think for that reason, it's got to be my number 6.
I think if you're looking at it objectively, it is in 6th place. I just don't know that it sort of stacks up.
It was also, you have more nostalgia attached to it.
Yes, that was going to be my next thing, is like, musically he gets more accomplished and ambitious in all the albums that follow that one, but that was my way into Pedro, and so it's always going to have a very special place in my heart. I love every song on it, and it's a different sort of vibe than most of his discography like goes on to occupy, but it's one that I still really love. I love its sort of acoustic, stripped down quality, even if, as I said, the newer records may be much more interesting. But so I understand. My number 5, Havasu. I see Havasu and Phoenix as being very much a pair. I like Havasu slightly better than Phoenix. I think, I mean, I even struggled with that, where I was like, Phoenix overall as an album maybe more consistent, but as our boy Bobby G said in a voicemail, it's a little long. There's times where I find it a little bit meandering. Not that I don't like that, but Havasu I just think has a few more sort of bangers. It's a little more pared down. He's bringing in the synthier elements a little more, which I appreciate. So it's pretty neck and neck. But I would say on the whole, I mean, Teenage Sequencer is like such a jam for me. And
Yes.
it's hard to sort of beat that for either record. So slightly above Phoenix is Havasu for me.
Yep. Speaking of Bobby G, I'm going to disappoint him by saying Achilles Heel is
Okay.
at number
All right.
5. I mean, because speaking of, sometimes I feel there's some. I think Achilles Heel was the first album that I felt like I'm like, I don't know, like Arizona to me, like I was like,
Sure.
I don't know, this song, it doesn't really do it for me. And there's some, I feel like the strong songs on Achilles Heel are very, very strong.
Yeah.
Then there's some songs on there that are like, I like them, but they're not like, they're not as, they don't have the strength as, say, like, the Foregone Conclusions or the Fleecings or the,
Right.
Bands with Managers or anything like that. So, I think of this as Achilles Heel being a more of an inconsistent record,
Sure.
which I think is probably probably going to be an unpopular opinion. But keep in mind, like, I'm coming at a majority of these records
Yeah.
completely new, with the exception of Winners. So
Yeah.
I have very little nostalgia attached to any of this. So as we've talked about since the beginning, that especially with MXPX, that the albums that we have an introduction to the band with, that that oftentimes will, that's a pivotal moment for you and that artist. So
Yeah.
if somebody has, there's also time and place that also plays into it. But I'm looking at a lot of this through my most recent experiences and how I've reacted and responded and
Yeah.
experienced them. And while some of my favorite songs probably by Pedro are on Achilles Heel,
Yeah.
there are some albums I feel like from beginning to end are just more bangers, more consistent, and I just love more.
Yeah.
Number 5.
That makes sense. We'll get to my placement of it, but I don't think it's unreasonable to have it sort of, middle of the pack kind of ranking. So my number 4 is It's Hard to Find a Friend. It again means a lot to me, but I think just above the two most recent records, for the reasons you talked about in part. I think everything in the top half for me is more ambitious, and that's probably ultimately what I'm drawn to the most. So yeah, 4, It's Hard to Find a Friend.
My 3, 4, and 5 were the ones that did a lot more moving around. And ultimately I was thinking about how I responded to some of those records, and I came to the conclusion that I needed to move certain ones up, and that was my number 4, which is Havasu.
Okay.
I was looking at the order and I'm like, I mean, like, it just didn't feel right, considering how the recent records emotionally impacted me. And that has been such a determining factor for some of these records, because I was like, I've been processing a lot of these lyrics and processing a lot of the experiences that Dave has been writing about. And as you said, like Teenage Sequencer is an absolute banger. First Drum Set, absolute banger. images that he paints of his childhood, it takes me to those places. And whether it's the roller rink or school hallways or um, any of the stuff of my childhood, I just think about
Mhm.
those experiences. And I didn't know how I was going to feel about these records, them being,
Mhm.
so new. But um, yeah, I think I'm just finding myself like very connected to what Dave's doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree, which is what makes it tough.
Yep.
All right. Top half.
Yeah.
Number 3, Achilles heel. Um, I agree with what you said. Again, objectively, I probably appreciate Havasu and Phoenix more as sort of pieces of art. But there are a lot of my favorites, as you said, on Achilles heel. Like there's a lot of bangers here.
Yep.
There are some misses, probably. It is sort of the like messiest Pedro album, maybe.
Sure.
Lots of like, swings and different vibes.
But he keeps swinging.
He keeps swinging. So yeah, I think it has to sort of go. I was wondering if it would be below It's Hard to Find a Friend, but at the end of the day, I'm just like, if you stack those two up, Achilles heel is much more sort of accomplished and interesting, I think, even if I am more nostalgic on the whole for It's Hard to Find a Friend, and kind of there isn't that sort of messiness, I would say, but I appreciate those keep swinging big swings, so it makes top half for me.
You probably have a sense at this point
Yes.
where we're going. So 3 is Phoenix for me.
Yeah.
I originally had Achilles heel, Phoenix, Havasu. It's Hard to Find a Friend.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I spent some time just thinking about the songs and listening to the songs again, and Phoenix was easily the record this season that I was most profound for me. And I talked about like how I've been processing these 2 newer albums in therapy, and the songs that he's written, and Powerful Taboo and Quietest Friend. And what is interesting, the what you talked about with Sunrise, how I'm like, yeah, it's not my favorite, but like how it sort of comes back around with Piano Bench, and
so good, man.
And then from the last song of Leaving the Valley and then into Havasu, it just like
it really is good.
Kind of becomes a piece. And plus Yellow Bike, Clean Up, Powerful Taboo, just banger. I just found myself being like, wow, this is, I mean, it's a great fucking record. And
it is.
I did not foresee this being top 3, but here we are.
Yeah. You make a compelling case. I'm still very sort of
dude, it was hard. Like I said, Achilles heel was my number 3, and I was like, I don't know, because then I was like, well, I'll explain my thinking in a second. But it was really tough. I was like, this is unfair.
Very, very rude to Phoenix to have me put it in 6th place. But yeah, I really do waffle. I mean, I think of those 2 as being so of a piece, it's hard to sort of parse them out. So maybe you're right. I really do go back and forth on whether I prefer Phoenix over Havasu. I think, I made my argument already. I guess I'm sticking with it. But boy, sure. Quietest Friend alone,
I know,
might be kind of enough to almost make me push it up instead. But anyway, sticking with that for now.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Top 2. I don't think it'll be a surprise for you.
Yeah.
Number 2, Control.
Yep. Same.
I think, so we got the same top 2.
Yes.
2, Control. 1, Winners Never Quit.
Yep.
I think that we will probably be outliers in naming winners as our favorite.
Probably.
I would think that most people would name Control, as Brandon did. It's probably the sort of definitive Pedro album in a lot of ways. It's the sort of, I don't want to say breakthrough, but I feel like Control was like having a sort of moment in the sort of indie world, a level of success he hadn't had before. And looking at it sort of, as Brandon was saying, like it had the like punk element that I loved at the time. I was very much in sync with its sort of questioning capitalism and WTO and stuff like that at the time. It was very much what I needed when I was 19 or 20 or whatever. And so there was a long time where I would have named Control my number one. I think again, almost like nostalgia plays a big role here, because I like this. I think he's more sort of like artistically successful on Have a Soon Phoenix. Obviously a very different vibe from Control, where I said, sometimes it's a little on the nose or whatever, but like front to back, there's not a note I don't love on Control. And it's so powerful still. Brandon named those drums. I think that's a big reason why I love it so much. The drums are absolutely wild on that record. And I don't know, I kind of not worried, but was curious about going through it again today in such detail, like would it sort of lower in my estimation, and it hasn't. It's still so good.
Good.
Captures a specific moment, but I can't. I did wrestle a little bit with whether it even should be my number one, but Winners takes it for reasons I'll get to in a minute. I don't know. What do you want to say about your number two, Control?
I think Control has so many perfect songs. I love the concept, the back to back of Winners and Control with the concepts are just so effective and compelling, and I love these two records is for the storytelling. But then when you factor in what you're talking about, like the more aggressive side of things that he takes and starts getting into more keys and synthy parts, it just like takes, you can start to see Dave becoming what he will become more and more experimental, more noisy, more textures, and I love that. But to talk about my number one, Winners Never Quit, 8 songs and all of them are perfect.
Yes.
It is a perfect record. It all works for me so perfectly. It's a non-skip. It's not a skipping record for me.
I agree. It may not have the like punch for punch of Control, but that's part of why I love it, is it covers a lot of different sonic and sort of like genre ground for him. And sort of thematic. I think it's his strongest sort of the like concept albumy things. It's the most sort of consistent, thorough narrative, and I still think the narrative is really powerful today. And I don't know. I mean, A Mind of Her Own and Never Leave a Job Half Done go so hard as Control, but then you got Slow and Steady Wins the Race and Bad Things to Such Good People, which are two of my very favorite Pedro or Bazan songs of all time. And I feel like at the end of the day, I'm like, any album that has those 2 songs on it, plus these songs that go really hard, plus these other weird sort of trippy songs,
right?
Whereas we said you're sort of feeling like dizzying, or like really letting the narrative take control of how the songs sound and the sonic quality, and being taken over by the storytelling. I just think you can't really compare to that variety of songs and kinds of storytelling. And again, anything with those two acoustic songs in particular just mean so much to me. So I'm like, oh, it's got both of those. It's got to be on the top of my list, I think.
I'm kind of in the same boat as you, that I'm like, kind of going into this season, I kind of thought like, man, I love Winners so much. I wonder if there's anything that's going to be, that will, usurp it. And it's like, well, no. As much as I love Control and the new records, it's with only Curse Your Branches, not being disqualified by a technicality,
Right.
it's it's always been Winners.
Yep. If we threw in the Bazan stuff, it's like, do you do the LPs? Do you do EPs? Are we throwing headphones, low tom overseas? It just gets very messy. I will say the Bazan solo stuff contains some of my favorite Bazan and/or Pedro songs ever. As we said, Curse Your Branches would probably top this for me, but that feels like a different sort of animal in some ways. Too much for us to sort of wrap our arms around within this brief context. But
and with what Brandon was saying too, that some of these things, some of these eras of Dave's work feel separate, and the the era of Pedro 1.0 and Pedro 2.0, there's like the cream filling in between that of like all of this solo work,
right,
and the sandwich of it is all it's all the same guy. He makes up all the parts, but it's just like, it's hard to be like, of this cookie metaphor I'm making. It's like, you take away the filling, and then you just got like, it's like, oh, you're taking away that one part.
Right.
It's like, that's what makes it the cookie. But then you're just like, this metaphor is getting a little away from me for a little bit, but you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. Give me all the Bazan cookies you got. But we, of course, would love to hear folks' album rankings. We will throw that out on the socials. I wonder how much sort of controversy there is here. My guess is that most people have the newer records lower too, for the reasons we said. But you've got Phoenix up there quite high.
I do.
So
I mean, if a record makes me cry, then I don't feel like I can.
Well, I think that's 6 for 6 here for me. So,
which is also why it's unfair,
right? Fun and challenging exercise here. Curious to hear what others have to say. I might, because I am a sadist, I might like try to throw in all the Bazan records and see how that would shake out.
Hey, that's your prerogative if you don't want to go to sleep tonight.
Right.
Speaking of challenges,
yes, time to transition over to our set lists. How impractical are they going to be? Perhaps if you're someone like John who's tried to be like, well, they wouldn't play that, you might throw all that out the window this season because talking about your all-time number one dude. So I tried to like not go fully like, oh, only like 5 people ever heard this one, and that's really the one that I got to hear if I'm going to hear him live. But it's also, I mean, this is like the weirdest possible Bazan set ever. It wouldn't happen, but it's stuff I haven't seen or seen a lot, and so that had to play as somebody I've seen so many times.
Sure.
And that's maybe like a little different from some of the bands we've covered. I mean, MXPX and 5 Iron, sure, seen them many times, but like not like 20 plus times or whatever. So I don't know. I tried to sort of, I've seen a lot of the Bazan stuff solo or maybe with a band, but I'd really like to see full synth versions live. Big surprise there that I'm heavy on the bleeps and bloops.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen him do a lot of that, like capturing the synth sound live. So that informed a fair amount of mine. That's the context I'll give. Do you want to say anything up top?
No, other than that, we sort of fudged our own rules a little bit here because we felt like, well, first off, it's our show. We can do whatever we want.
Right.
But that it felt, I said, I texted you and my direct quote was 10 songs is bullshit. And so then we sort of decided that, you know what, why don't we give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room of what, if we're defining the set lists, then we get to decide what it looks like.
You're saying, hey, maybe I can't do 10 songs, and I'm saying, hey, maybe I can't do only Pedro songs. Maybe I'm going to include some songs we've never talked about on the podcast, which is a first for us. I will say I did go into the Bazan solo realm a bit, and yes, there may be a song or two that we haven't talked about on the pod, but again, this is my exercise. I want to see the set list. Oh, it'd be so great. And yeah, they all do blur together for me a bit. Sometimes I forget what is a Bazan song and what's a Pedro song, and especially when you're seeing them live, it's like I've seen a lot of iterations of these songs, and so this is what I would most want to see. Do you want to go first, or should I?
You can go first.
All right. I will say, when we've been covering punk, I've tried to sort of stick to this ebb and flow thing of like, this is sort of the hardcore section. This is where we open up the pit.
Right.
We'll ease off here a little bit. It was a different structure this time around. But I did kind of try to follow a sort of sonic feeling order. So I'm kicking things off with a song you don't know, which is How I Remember. It's from the Fewer Moving Parts David Bazan EP, his first solo EP. It's such a banger. It has this completely rad synthy ending, real like Nintendo-y sounds. And it also just like kicks off immediately with the full band and a ring in the background. And it's just a very propulsive song. I love a, hard hitting, going big opener. The lights are flashing. So that's where I'm at. I'm at number one. Next, we go to With You, another song you probably don't know, which is off of the Dave Bazan LP Blanco. It's a very bleepy bloopy, propulsive one. I think it'd be really high energy live. I've never really seen it with all the bleeps and bloops that the album version has. And I would love to kind of transition from this electric guitar driven banger of an opening to a bleepy bloopy, even cranking up the levels a little bit more, getting that energy up for the second one. Be great to see that live. Number 3, pull back a little bit. First drum set. At least for the first half of the song, we're pulled back a little bit. But I can testify that this is a great live one because I just saw it a couple weeks ago. And it's obviously you can sense listening to it on the record that this will be a great live song because he really takes you on a journey. And once that band comes in, boy, is it so satisfying. And as the drums build throughout the song, it's great.
Yep.
So yeah, for me, we're cooling things off a little bit with that first half, but then by the time the band is going wild on the end, you're just so pumped. Then we go into the fleecing. Different era, different mode, but this is one I would really want to see live. I'm sure I have, but again, like with that full synthy line in it, I think would make a big difference. I would like to transition from the crunchy guitar Havasu era Pedro to the Achilles heel, a little weirder, kind of sleeker and bouncier thing he was doing in that era. Then moving away from synths, moving well, I guess we're still in synths here, but Teenage Sequencer. It's not synthy in the sense that it's bleeps and bloops, but it's got that sequencer aspect, the underlying beat that builds with the other elements. But again, this is a new one I will always want to see live. And again, I saw it a couple weeks ago. It was great. I always wanted to do it now. Sort of a sweet, quieter moment in the set. We're paring things back a bit after that, after the fleecing. And then out of that, back to keyboards. Bless This Mess. Curse Your Branches. I want a really big sound. It's such a rocker. I want that organ sound. I want that like bass synth sound. I want the hand claps. When I saw this one live on the tour for the record, I was just like, ooh, this is great. And he really pulled it off. So I would like to see that again. Then a little bit of a weird turn here. the 5 chord, which is a headphone song.
Okay.
We are talking headphones on Patreon this week. Had to fit it in there. I had to make another case to you as sort of a fudging things with the
Right.
song, where this was a song that only came on the iTunes release, but is, spoiler alert, my favorite song on the headphones record. If you want to say it's on the record, I'm going to say that it is. It's been included in different versions of it, and I think a lot of people know it now, but I mainly got it here because I think it would be really cool to hear a headphone song in a Pedro set at this point. And this is probably my favorite headphone song. This is kind of the one, like, oh shit, like deep cut moment I allowed myself here, but it's such a bop. Here's what I would do. I would hold the big cacophonous ending of Bless This Mess, and like then the drums come in for 5 chord on top of that, which is like, which we will hear in the Patreon. So anyway, I would just love to see that transition. I'd love to see a set of Pedro that includes Bazan and headphones and Pedro and just all the stuff. So then move into aforementioned Quietest Friend. Another one that I kind of have to see live now. If I ever see him do a set, I'm like hoping that he's going to play Quietest Friend. So good live, really satisfied me from what I was hoping it would be. And kind of a going out with the last big song before cooling down next couple songs. So that's the high of sort of the biggest noise of Quietest Friend. And then In Stitches.
Oh, interesting.
Curse Your Branches. I don't know that I've ever seen this one live with a band. I may have on that tour. And I remember they sort of did a version that didn't have piano and kind of transposed that stuff to guitar and bass, and it sounded great. You know, would I love to see a version that did have the full piano? Yes, I think that would be great. But I'd really love to see this one either way. It's one of my favorite Bazan or Pedro songs, as we talked about last week. Maybe not the most high energy ending for a set, but this is where I'm sort of fudging things in the way that you might be, where I'm imagining that we're sort of leaving things on this powerful note of the ending. And then, he'd be coming back out for an encore, close things out, right? So that's song 9 for me. And I'm allowing 10 to be my encore. So did things, a little bit differently there maybe, but I'm imagining he comes out for this sort of fake encore. It's just Dave and the acoustic guitar, and he plays Bad Things to Such Good People. One of my absolute favorites of his. I've seen Slow and Steady enough, it is maybe my favorite Pedro song, but I'm just like, I'd rather see this one live at this point in my life. It would be great to see it again. And I think it would be a cool ending to the set. It'd be really powerful. Him strumming those double time chords, just him, and then he leaves the stage. It'd be great. So that leaves us 5 Pedro songs, mostly new stuff, 4 Bazan songs, and 1 headphone song. So tried to get different eras in there. A weird set, but one that, like, once I put the list together, I was like, I really would like to see this. I want to see these songs going in and out of each other. So let me hear yours.
All right. So I conceded that you could do non-Pedro songs that we didn't discuss for your set list if I could have a 12 song set list where 10 is the main set and then 2 are the encore.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. And seeing as though I've never seen Dave or Pedro live, some of the songs I have on my list are ones that you said, like, I've seen this before. So but I will say that even with your the stuff that I've never listened to as being included in your list, we still shared 4 songs.
Okay, that's pretty good.
So but I opened with Slow and Steady.
Okay,
I feel like I want to see that as an opener, because I think that would be that would just get me so pumped, because I would love to just belt out and sing all of those words.
Yeah, man. As we talked about with Brandon, I love that the the first Pedro show after they reunited that he captures at the end of the movie. The first song they play is Slow and Steady. So great.
Yep. So, and I know that them playing full band would make it so it's not like this is a slow start to
Right.
the set. So it's going to be, because there's the when I arrived at
Yeah.
so it goes
Yep.
it goes a little harder live
Does.
than it does on the record, but
Yeah.
though I do
Great
love
choice.
both variations.
Yes. Me too.
Then keep it going a little bit with Powerful Taboo.
Love it.
I wanted to have a nice big sort of power chord kind of song.
Yeah.
Going from I want to keep the energy up a little bit at the very start. So and I wanted to represent early on. I wanted to get a newer song in there.
Yeah.
Follow that up by Indian Summer.
Yep.
In our minds, these performances have all of the instruments that we want them to have.
Yes.
So the like I want hearing that blare out from the stage.
Yeah.
Would be so great. And then the bass coming in. Oh, I'd be so psyched. And I would also be curious to see how he would change the lyrics.
Yes.
For Corporate Come.
Yes.
Follow that up with a first drum set. So we're slowing it down a little bit. You said that you saw it. It does seem like a good live live song, and wanted to get some new shit in there. But then I got to go back to Winners because we need a little mind of our own.
Ooh, yeah. Good call.
Just, to remind everybody.
It's so good.
It's so great.
You put down that telephone.
Yeah. So I gotta follow that banger up with The Fleecing. You asked me if this was going to be on my list, and
it was.
It has to be.
Yep.
It has the song has everything. Yep. But like I said, yes, Achilles Heel was lower in my list, but this song ruled.
It's an all-timer.
It's an all-timer. There's so many cool. There's some other songs on that are on Achilles Heel that I think would be really interesting to see live, but obviously I can't put every song on there, and I think The Fleecing tops out any other song at this point that I would like to see from Achilles Heel. Maybe in the future after I've seen Pedro and Dave more, my set list will be a little bit more adventurous like yours, but I'm a basic bitch. I want to see the hits.
Adventurous or like ridiculous, but
unrealistic.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, are you gonna play that song that was an exclusive that no one's ever heard?
No, we'll not be playing that one.
Yeah, it's like, stop talking about masks. Play another song. I'm sorry.
No, I won't be playing the 5 chord. Sorry,
guy. Follow that up with When We Fall. Cool. I wanted to get some Curse Your Branches in here. I love the sort of the style of his sort of alt country-ish Americana stuff that he has going on in this record. Yes.
I mean, when it starts out that way, you're just having a fun time. You're in for a good time.
Yep. Did I call it When We Fall? I meant When We Fell.
When We Fell.
Whatever.
You're a basic bitch. So.
I'm a basic bitch. And, I don't know how much he does, if he gets back to living room shows, how much he does, if he's going to play the hits, or if he'll go back to playing Curse Your Branches stuff, or
It's
like
been a while since I've seen When We Fell live, I gotta say, but that would be very fun.
Well, another one I'd like to see. Never Leave a Job Half Done.
Hell yeah.
A
Love all these
mind,
winter songs.
A Mind of Her Own, Never Leave a Job Half Done are a pair to me. So
Yes.
you can't have one without the other, in my opinion. And that opening, we talked about it on the Winners episode.
So good, man.
It's and then the bass coming in. Oh, it's so good. I would be so. You end with that. Everybody would be pumped
so good.
for the.
What a great live song that is.
Yep. All right, moving on. Quietest Friend. So this is where the things in the set are going to get a little bit weird. But, Quietest Friend. It's albeit on a new record. I think we have both determined that this song is an all-timer.
Absolutely.
And a very emotional song that I deeply appreciate.
Yep.
And I would like to hear all the weird stuff, in the latter half of the song, and see what they could do with that live. Maybe a song I thought I would see on your set list that I decided to add to mine. Second Best.
Gosh, that is one of my favorites live songs.
After hearing you talk about it and after listening to it again recently, I was like, man, the intensity of this song plus the drums just on this record in general, I'm like, man, what a way to get to the end of a set with like the intensity of that song.
I considered it,
even though the
it's
tone
hard to,
is a little
it's heavy,
but
but the like live, you're just like, oh man, the drums are like
nothing but crashes over and over and over.
It's a good set.
Hey, well, he leaves the stage and people are like, whoa, that's a weird way to
just like every show.
Two more songs. Like, all right, how about we get into a little Bearing Witness?
Ooh,
throwback to some Curse Your Branches. Maybe
that'd be a very fun start to an encore.
Especially a nice palate cleanser.
Yes.
after Second Best.
That's good.
And then maybe a curious ending song, but I thought gotta end with the new shit. Gotta end maybe a little bittersweet. We're ending with Teenage Sequencer.
Perfect.
Specifically because I wanted to have.
Yeah. Oof. You gotta chill.
Bill was wrong.
Fucking Bill.
And you wished you had stayed through the end of our song.
Perfect.
And that's it. The end of our song.
The end of our set.
End of our set.
I love it.
Yeah. So even though it might be a little bit of a weird, bittersweet ending,
I love it, man.
Yeah, I was like, I gotta throw in.
This is a great set. It's more realistic than mine.
Is it though? I mean,
well, I don't know. It's probably more like encompassing. It includes multiple songs from a lot of the favorite albums. I don't know. I think it's really, really good. I would love to see it.
Maybe Second Best wouldn't be there. Maybe the Curse Your Branches wouldn't be there.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Second Best though, man, it is. You may remember me. Might have to go back to me going, yeah, Second Best, like I did at that one show.
It's like,
until Dave kindly like, I'm not playing that one. But Johnny wanted to hear it then. He still wants to hear it now. I mean, our dude Jason from LA coming in with that intel on the Discord that Streets are talking about a possible Control 20th 21st anniversary tour. He did a 10th anniversary tour, and I was like, well, he can't do another one because that one just happened. That was just a few years ago. I'm like, oh shit, that was 10 years ago that he did the Control tour, which
We
rules.
are
So
old.
we are old. I would welcome another. Part of me is like, he's done that, but I'm like, if he wants to do another Control tour, I'm not.
You're gonna fault the dude for wanting to do another Control tour?
We'll see that anytime.
Yeah, every 10 years, bro. Just
yes, please. That sounds great. Well, that was great. That was very fun. It was an interesting challenge for somebody whose songs I know so well, and who I've seen so many times in so many different eras. But this is great. I would happily see either of these sets. We will see him together in some iteration someday, and boy, that'll be great. I'm sorry that you've been deprived.
So many tears.
I know, man.
So much weeping. So many Dave hugs. I'm sure.
We'll bring Doug, and he'll understand.
Like, Doug, this is the guy who has moved me to tears in multiple therapy sessions.
David would be like, "Oh, great, man, right on." Well, those are our set lists.
Yes.
Please call in, write in with your ideal Dave set lists, however that looks for you. I don't know what's coming next for him. We'll see. I'm excited to see.
I think Santa Cruz is coming.
We know we got Santa Cruz coming, but I'm like, are we due for another living room tour? I know he was mentioning that this time around for Pedro, that's a lot of the reason why he switched to Pedro is to sell tickets well again at clubs, and it was maybe a little more sparsely attended. But the world's a weird place right now.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, I will be very excited to be there, especially after all this work we've been doing with his texts this season.
Yep.
So what a great time. Maybe a depressing stretch for some folks, but we got those Martin Brothers coming up next. There's some weird stuff in there. Should be fun. Got a fun guest coming up to talk that. A couple of fun guests coming up the next 2 weeks. But yes, in the meantime, let us know what you think about Pedro, about today's episode, about our conversation with Brandon Vedder at Magnified Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Follow and subscribe to the pod if you haven't already, and give us a rating or a review. Email us at magnifiedpod@gmail.com.
You can leave us a voicemail at 872-762-4763, 872-7-MAG-POD.
You can support us at the Patreon at patreon.com/magnifiedpod, where this week we'll be getting into the Headphones record, beloved one album side project for Dave that I know some folks are interested in hearing us talk about. I'm very eager to get into that. Check that out over there. You can also pick up some new season 4 merch at magnifiedpod.storeenvy.com. Thanks to Small Step Records for sponsoring us. Go to smallsteprecords.com to learn more. And thanks to Shadow producer Jason and Bruno at Unoriginal Vinyl for our artwork. Well, I think I hear the voice of the spirit begging us to shut the fuck up. We'll be back to try to make you go astray next week when we'll discuss Starflyer 59's The Fashion Focus with a special guest. Ooh, baby. It really just, the pleasure center in my brain is just popping up. Space.
You said to meet by the gym after school before volleyball.
Oh man, I'm gonna start crying.
Oh man, I remember texting this to you months ago long before we got to it, just being like, this song makes me cry, just get ready.
Yeah, man. It's these new albums do something to me that and I think it's because I don't know if we did talk about this, that these earlier records were all intellectual and now these are all emotional. So like they hit in such different ways. So
totally.
Thank you, John, for being my Pedro Sherpa and
happy to
guiding me through these records.
That's another brand new sentence. Yes, happy to. If anybody has any follow-up questions about Pedro that I can, it's really going to be hard for me to let go talking about my dude every week. So if you want to start a book study or something, you just let me know.
For more shows like this one, visit rockcandyrecordings.com.